Look what the Navy dragged in, boys. A daycare worker with a toy gun. Staff Sergeant Knox Blackwood's voice boomed across the Coronado precision range like a war horn, his massive 6'4" frame casting a shadow over the equipment tables. His desert camouflage uniform stretched tight across muscled shoulders as he gestured mockingly toward the petite blonde woman, methodically unpacking a rifle case at Station 7. I bet she's here to teach us how to finger paint targets. 40 elite Navy SEALs erupted in cruel laughter, their voices echoing off the concrete barriers like wolves circling fresh prey. The California morning sun glinted off their polished combat boots as they sensed weakness in the small figure before them. Meadow Sterling didn't flinch. Her blonde curls, escaping from that messy high bun, caught the breeze as she continued her setup ritual with mechanical precision. Gray civilian contractor shirt, dark military pants, brown combat boots. She looked exactly like what Knox claimed, someone playing soldier. "Ma'am, you sure you're in the right place?" Lieutenant Cade Pierce shouted from the observation deck, pointing dramatically toward the base exit. "The Girl Scout cookie booth is about 10 miles that way." More laughter. Someone whistled. A paper airplane sailed past her head. But as Meadow reached for her scope case, her gray shirt pulled tight across her right arm for just a moment, revealing the hint of something dark beneath the fabric. Intricate black scales that seemed to move in the shifting shadows. No one noticed. They were too busy laughing. She straightened slowly, turned to face the crowd, and spoke for the first time. Her voice carried clearly across the range, calm as still water. "Before we begin, I have one question." The laughter died. "How many of you have actually made a confirmed kill at 1,500 yards? Complete, sudden, suffocating silence. "That's what I thought," she smiled. "Not friendly, not warm. Predatory. Now let me teach you how to really shoot." The morning heat was already building at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, that dry California sun that turned concrete into griddles and made steel too hot to touch with bare skin. The precision marksmanship range stretched out like a runway, with target stations dotting the landscape at measured intervals. 100 yards, 300, 500, 800, and the infamous 1,000-yard line where only the most elite shooters dared attempt their craft. Knox Blackwood owned this space the way apex predators own their territory. At 240 pounds of pure intimidation wrapped in desert camouflage, he had built his reputation on breaking the weak and forging the strong. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. When he spotted the petite blonde woman setting up at the instructor's station, his reaction was immediate and visceral. "What fresh nonsense is this?" he'd muttered to Master Chief Diego Rivera, a grizzled veteran whose scarred hands told stories of 23 years in special operations. Rivera just shrugged, checking his watch with practiced indifference. "Orders came down from the Pentagon. Some new initiative about civilian contractor integration. We sit through 2 hours of whatever this lady has to say, then we get back to real training." Knox's expression had darkened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "Real training? Chief, I've got operators who can put 3 rounds through a quarter at 500 yards in crosswinds. What's this civilian going to teach us? How to shoot squirrels in her backyard?" The conversation had carried as Knox intended it to. Soon, the assembled SEALs were sizing up their supposed instructor with undisguised skepticism. These were men accustomed to perfection, warriors who had earned their positions through blood, sweat, and capabilities that defied normal human limitations. Lieutenant Pierce, a lean Texan with a perpetual smirk, started the commentary. "Think she's ever even seen a real rifle? That little pop gun she's got there looks like something my daughter would use at summer camp." Petty Officer Santos, usually the quiet observer of the group, found himself drawn into the mockery. "Maybe she's here to teach us about gun safety. You know, always point the barrel in a safe direction, and all that basic stuff we learned in boot camp." The laughter built gradually, feeding on itself like wildfire consuming dry brush. Each comment grew more cutting, more personal, more designed to wound. Casey Walsh, one of only 3 women in the SEAL community, watched from the back with growing discomfort. She recognized the dynamic all too well. The immediate dismissal based on appearance, the assumption that competence correlated with size and aggression. But even Casey found herself questioning what this civilian instructor could possibly offer to operators who trained at levels most people couldn't comprehend. Meadow continued her setup, seemingly oblivious to the growing commentary. Her movements were methodical, precise, almost ritualistic. She checked her scope mounts 3 times, running her fingers along the rail system with the kind of attention most people reserved for defusing bombs. When she attached the bipod, each click of the mechanism was audible in the morning air, sharp and final like a closing vault. "Look at her taking her sweet time," Knox called out, his voice carrying the authority of command. "We've got a full training schedule today, lady. Some of us have real missions to prepare for." Meadow glanced up briefly, her blue eyes meeting his for just a moment. Those eyes held something that made Rivera's instincts prickle with recognition, the kind of stillness that came before sudden, decisive action. "Precision takes time, Sergeant. Rushing gets people killed." The response drew more laughter, but it was different now, edged with genuine contempt. Knox stepped closer, his bulk casting her in shadow like a mountain blocking the sun. "Killed?" He practically spat the word. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you look like you'd faint at the sound of a firecracker. When exactly did you serve in combat?" "I didn't say I served in combat," Meadow replied calmly, returning her attention to her rifle. The weapon itself was civilian legal but clearly high-end, a precision bolt-action rifle with modifications that spoke of serious intent rather than weekend hobby shooting. "I said rushing gets people killed. That's true whether you're crossing a street or crossing a kill zone." Lieutenant Pierce jumped in from the observation deck, his voice dripping with theatrical disbelief. "Kill zone? Holy cow, she's using operator terminology now. Did you learn that from watching movies, sweetheart?" The sweetheart hung in the air like a challenge. Even the enlisted men shifted uncomfortably. There were lines you didn't cross, even in the military's rough and tumble culture. But Meadow didn't react. She simply continued her preparation, checking her ammunition with the same methodical care she'd shown everything else. Master Chief Rivera found himself studying her more carefully. 27 years in Marine Force recon had taught him to recognize certain movements, certain habits that spoke of extensive training under pressure. The way she handled her equipment, the unconscious scanning of the environment, the precise placement of every item within easy reach, these weren't the actions of someone playing soldier. "You know what I think?" Knox announced to the crowd, playing to his audience like a comedian working a room. "I think someone in Washington decided we needed sensitivity training disguised as marksmanship instruction. Pretty soon they'll be sending us flower arrangers to teach us about battlefield aesthetics." The laughter was ugly now, meant to wound and humiliate. But as the sound washed over her, something shifted in Meadow's posture. It was subtle, a straightening of the shoulders, a settling of weight into a more balanced stance. Her breathing changed too, becoming deeper, more controlled. The transformation was so slight that only someone with extensive combat training might notice it. Rivera noticed. He'd spent enough time around truly dangerous people to recognize the signs. The nervous energy that had surrounded Meadow like a cloud was dissipating, replaced by something much more focused. It reminded him of the stillness that came over snipers just before they engaged targets at extreme range. That moment when the human body became a precision instrument calibrated for a single purpose. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, hit that like button right now. This story will prove that deadly skills often come in unexpected packages. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the thanks button to support the channel, because what you're about to witness will completely shatter every assumption these SEALs have about strength and capability. "Sergeant Knox," Meadow said, her voice carrying clearly across the range despite its quiet tone. "Since you seem to have opinions about my qualifications, why don't you demonstrate yours? Standard qualification course, 300 yards, 5 rounds, rapid fire." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Knox looked around at his men, seeing the expectation in their faces. He couldn't back down now, not in front of 40 elite operators who looked to him for leadership. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think you understand what you're asking." This isn't a competition. This is supposed to be your instruction period. Then instruct me, Meadow replied, her tone carrying the faintest hint of steel beneath the silk. Show me how it's done. Knox grabbed his rifle from the equipment rack, a military-issue M4 carbine configured for precision work. He'd qualified expert with it for 8 straight years, could hit man-sized targets at 400 yards consistently. The 300-yard shot she'd suggested was well within his capabilities, almost insultingly easy. He dropped into a prone position with practiced efficiency, adjusting his scope and checking wind conditions out of habit more than necessity. The morning air was still, the California sun providing perfect visibility. The target at 300 yards looked massive through his optic. 5 rounds rapid fire, he announced, chambering the first round. Watch and learn, ma'am. The shots came in quick succession, bang, 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 with barely a pause between them. Knox was a good shooter, one of the best in his unit. All 5 rounds found the target, clustering in an area about the size of a dinner plate. Not perfect, but solid performance that would earn him expert qualification on any military range. He stood up, ejecting the empty magazine with a flourish. That's how it's done. Consistent, reliable, combat-effective shooting. Now, what exactly are you planning to teach us that we don't already know? Meadow walked over to the spotting scope, studying his target through the high-powered optic. The silence stretched out as she examined his work, her expression unreadable. Finally, she straightened up. Not bad, she said. Your breathing was consistent, your trigger control was smooth, and your sight picture was properly aligned. You're clearly well-trained. Knox smiled, thinking he'd made his point. But Meadow wasn't finished. However, your shots are pulling slightly left, suggesting either a trigger finger placement issue or a scope that's not perfectly zeroed. Your rapid-fire tempo was actually too fast for maximum accuracy. You weren't allowing time for proper follow-through on each shot. And most importantly, you were shooting at a stationary target in perfect conditions with unlimited time to prepare. She paused, letting that sink in. In real combat, how often do you get perfect conditions? Look, lady, Knox began, but Meadow held up a hand. My turn. Before anyone could object, Meadow moved to the firing line, but instead of the 300-yard target Knox had used, she pointed toward the 500-yard line. Let's make it interesting. She dropped into position with fluid grace, her body settling into the prone stance like water finding its level. But her positioning was different from anything the SEALs had seen in their standard training. Her support hand was placed differently. Her trigger finger made contact at an unusual angle, and her breathing pattern seemed almost meditative. What kind of shooting position is that? Lieutenant Pierce called out. That's not in any manual I've ever seen. Meadow didn't answer. She was checking wind conditions, not with instruments, but with observation, watching how the heat shimmer affected her view through the scope, noting how the grass moved at different distances, feeling the air pressure against her exposed skin. It was the kind of environmental reading that came from thousands of hours in field conditions, where meteorological data wasn't available. She chambered around and settled behind the rifle. The silence that followed was different from the mocking quiet of minutes before. This was expectant, focused. Even the skeptics found themselves holding their breath. The shot broke like thunder, the sound echoing off the concrete barriers and rolling across the range. Through the spotting scope, Casey Walsh watched the 500-yard target, dead center, exactly in the middle of the X-ring. Not bad, Knox admitted grudgingly. But one shot doesn't. 4 more shots followed in rapid succession, each one precisely timed, each one delivered with mechanical consistency. When the echoes faded, Meadow stood up and stepped back from the rifle. Check the target, she said simply. Casey adjusted the spotting scope, bringing the distant target into sharp focus. What she saw made her gasp audibly. All 5 shots had passed through the same hole, not just in the X-ring, but overlapping so precisely that the damage looked like it had been made by a single, perfectly placed round. That's impossible, Knox whispered, moving to the spotting scope himself. At 500 yards with rapid fire, environmental factors alone should spread those shots by at least. He stopped talking when he saw the target for himself. The other SEALs crowded around, each taking their turn at the optic. The impossible had just happened in front of 40 witnesses. "Lucky shot," Lieutenant Pierce announced, but his voice lacked conviction. Wind conditions must have been perfect. "5 lucky shots?" Casey asked quietly. "All in the exact same place?" Master Chief Rivera had been in special operations long enough to recognize something extraordinary when he saw it. He studied Meadow with new eyes, taking in details he'd missed before. The way she moved with unconscious efficiency, the complete absence of wasted motion in her actions, the fact that she'd just accomplished something that shouldn't have been possible with a civilian rifle under field conditions. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "where exactly did you learn to shoot like that?" "Here and there," Meadow replied, beginning to clean her rifle with the same methodical precision she'd shown in everything else. "You pick things up." But Knox wasn't ready to concede. His authority had been challenged in front of his men, and the 5 impossible shots had shaken something fundamental in his worldview. One target, perfect conditions. Let's see how you do when things get complicated. He gestured toward the 1,000-yard line, where targets waited at the absolute limit of the range's capability. At that distance, shots required mathematical precision, accounting for bullet drop, wind drift, air density, and a dozen other factors. It was the kind of shooting that separated the elite from the merely good. "1,000 yards, Knox announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the range. "Moving target simulation, crosswind conditions, timed fire, 2 minutes to engage 5 targets in sequence." It was an impossible challenge, even with military-grade equipment and unlimited preparation time. The shot difficulty bordered on supernatural. With civilian gear and a 2-minute time limit, it was simply undoable. The precision optics Meadow was adjusting featured advanced ballistic computers that calculated wind drift, temperature variations, and bullet drop automatically. These military-grade targeting systems weren't just equipment. They were the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Modern tactical scopes integrated GPS coordinates, range finding, and environmental sensors into single targeting solutions. In combat situations where a single shot could save or cost dozens of lives, precision wasn't luxury. It was survival. The durability of these systems had been tested under conditions that would destroy civilian equipment instantly. "Sergeant," Commander Jackson Vale's voice cut across the range like a blade. The assembled SEALs snapped to attention as the base's senior officer approached. Vale was old-school military, a career officer who'd earned his rank through competence rather than politics. His weathered face showed the accumulated stress of 2 decades in command positions. "Sir," Knox responded, coming to attention, "we're conducting the mandatory civilian contractor training as ordered." Vale studied the situation with calculating eyes. He'd heard the shooting from his office, the distinctive crack of precision rifles being fired in rapid succession. When he'd looked out his window and seen the entire training class gathered around the spotting scopes, he'd decided to investigate personally. "And how is that training progressing, Sergeant?" "Well, sir, the contractor has demonstrated some shooting ability, but we were just about to test her capabilities under more challenging conditions." Vale walked over to the spotting scope, adjusting it to examine the 500-yard target. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He spent long minutes studying the target, occasionally adjusting the scope's focus as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Contractor," he said finally, turning to face Meadow. "What's your name?" "Meadow Sterling, sir. Civilian marksmanship instructor. Contracted through the Pentagon's Skills Integration Program." Vale nodded slowly, but his eyes remained fixed on her face. Something was bothering him, some nagging sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. "Sterling. That name doesn't sound familiar. How long have you been doing this kind of instruction?" "About 6 months, sir, since I transitioned out of previous employment." "Previous employment?" Meadow's fingers moved unconsciously to her collar, adjusting the gray fabric slightly. The motion was subtle, but Vale caught it, the kind of nervous gesture that suggested hidden information. "Various consulting work, sir. risk assessment, security evaluation, that sort of thing. It was a non-answer, the kind of vague response that people gave when they had something to hide. Vale had heard enough of them over the years to recognize evasion when he heard it. "Sergeant Knox," he said, never taking his eyes off Meadow. "I think your 1,000-yard challenge is an excellent idea. But let's make it interesting. Full combat simulation, unknown distance targets, wind conditions, limited ammunition, and a real-time pressure scenario." He gestured toward the advanced training area where computer-controlled targets could simulate actual battlefield conditions. "If Miss Sterling is going to be instructing our operators, she should demonstrate her capabilities under realistic conditions." Meadow's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Sir, that level of simulation isn't usually part of civilian contractor demonstrations." "No," Vale agreed. "It isn't. But then, most civilian contractors don't put 5 rounds through the same hole at 500 yards either." The challenge was issued, and there was no backing down. As they moved toward the advanced training area, Meadow's fingers found the scope adjustments on her rifle, making micro-corrections with the kind of muscle memory that spoke of thousands of hours behind the trigger. The advanced range was a different animal entirely. Computer-controlled targets could appear and disappear at random intervals, simulating the unpredictable nature of combat engagements. Environmental controls could introduce crosswinds, temperature variations, even simulated weather conditions. It was as close to real combat as training could get without actual bullets flying back at the shooter. "Standard rules," Vale announced as they reached the firing line. "Unknown distance targets at ranges from 300 to 1,000 yards. Targets will appear for random intervals between 5 and 30 seconds. 5 targets total, 5 rounds of ammunition. Miss any target, and the exercise is considered failed." The SEALs gathered around the observation area, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. This was the kind of shooting challenge that would test even their most skilled marksmen. For a civilian contractor to attempt it bordered on either supreme confidence or complete delusion. Meadow settled into position behind her rifle, but her setup process was different now. Gone was the methodical, almost leisurely pace she'd shown earlier. Now her movements were sharp, efficient, practiced. She adjusted her scope with rapid precision, checked her ammunition with barely a glance, and settled into a shooting position that spoke of countless hours under pressure. "Targets will begin appearing in 30 seconds, Vale announced. "Time starts now." The first target appeared at approximately 600 yards, a man-sized silhouette that would be visible for exactly 20 seconds. Through her scope, Meadow calculated distance, wind drift, and bullet drop in seconds that would have taken most shooters minutes to work through. Her finger found the trigger with gentle pressure, and the rifle cracked once. The target dropped immediately, hit center mass. Target number 2 appeared at 800 yards, visible for only 10 seconds. Meadow's rifle tracked smoothly to the new position, her breathing controlled, her trigger press perfect. Another hit, another dropped target. By the 4th target, the assembled SEALs had stopped talking entirely. They were watching something that transcended normal shooting skill and moved into the realm of the extraordinary. Meadow's movements were smooth as flowing water, each shot delivered with mechanical precision, despite the enormous time pressure. The 5th and final target appeared at the maximum range, 1,000 yards exactly, and would be visible for only 8 seconds. At that distance, with that time constraint, the shot was mathematically at the edge of possibility. The bullet would take over a second to reach the target, meaning Meadow had to predict exactly where it would be when the round arrived. She settled behind the rifle one final time, her breathing slowing to an almost supernatural calm. The world around her seemed to fade away. The watching SEALs, the pressure of the challenge, everything except the target and the precise calculations needed to reach it. The rifle spoke, and 1 second later, the distant target fell. Silence followed, absolute and complete. 40 elite special operations personnel stood in stunned quiet, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. 5 targets, 5 shots, 5 hits under conditions that would challenge the world's best military snipers. Commander Vale was the first to speak. "Miss Sterling, that was extraordinary shooting. Where exactly did you learn those skills?" But before Meadow could answer, Her shirt had shifted during the final shooting position, and Lieutenant Pierce caught sight of something that made him freeze. Just visible above the neckline of her gray contractor shirt was the edge of what looked like a tattoo. Not decorative artwork, but something black and geometric, like part of a symbol or insignia. "Ma'am," Pierce said carefully, "is that a unit tattoo?" Meadows' hand moved quickly to adjust her collar, but not before several other SEALs had noticed. In military culture, tattoos often told stories, unit insignia, deployment markers, memorials to fallen comrades. But the glimpse they'd caught looked different, more complex, and somehow darker than typical military ink. "Just personal artwork," Meadow replied, but her voice had changed slightly. The casual confidence was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more guarded. Vale studied her face with growing intensity. Something about her shooting style, combined with the hint of military tattoo, was triggering memories he couldn't quite grasp. The way she moved, the precision of her shooting, the complete comfort under pressure. It all suggested training far beyond civilian contractor level. Are you starting to suspect there's more to Meadow than meets the eye? Smash that like button if you're getting chills from these impossible shots. The biggest revelation is still coming, so stay tuned. Master Chief Rivera approached Commander Vale with obvious concern. "Sir, I've been thinking about that shooting exhibition. Those weren't lucky shots or civilian-level skills. That woman has training that goes way beyond anything available in the private sector." Vale nodded grimly. "I've been thinking the same thing, Chief. Her shooting style reminded me of something, but I can't quite place it. Run a background check on Meadow Sterling through military channels. Something about this whole situation doesn't add up." While Rivera headed to the communications center, the training exercise continued, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Where before there had been mockery and dismissal, now there was genuine respect, mixed with growing suspicion. The SEALs found themselves studying Meadow with new eyes, looking for clues about who she really was. Casey Walsh was the first to notice additional details. As Meadow bent to examine her rifle case, her shirt pulled tight across her back, revealing what looked like significant scarring along her shoulder blade. Not the kind of surgical scars from medical procedures, but the irregular, jagged marks that came from shrapnel or explosive damage. "Sarge," Casey whispered to Knox, "look at her shoulder when she bends over. Those are combat wounds." Knox studied Meadow more carefully, his earlier hostility replaced by professional curiosity. Now that he was looking for them, the signs were obvious. The way she unconsciously scanned the horizon while shooting, checking for threats that weren't there. The manner in which she positioned herself with clear lines of sight to all potential approaches. The fact that she kept her back to solid cover whenever possible. "Ma'am," Knox said, his tone much more respectful than before. "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on appearances that were clearly wrong. Would you mind if I asked about your background?" Meadow looked up from her equipment, her blue eyes meeting his directly for the first time. "What would you like to know, Sergeant?" "Well, for starters, where did you serve? Because that shooting ability doesn't come from civilian training." "I never said I didn't serve," Meadow replied carefully. "I said I was currently working as a civilian contractor. People transition out of military service for various reasons." "What unit?" Lieutenant Pierce pressed. "Rangers? Special Forces? Because what you just did requires training at the highest levels." Meadow's fingers found her collar again, the nervous gesture that Commander Vale had noticed earlier. "I'd rather not get into specifics. Some experiences are better left in the past." But the questions were building momentum now. Petty Officer Santos, who had initially joined in the mockery, found himself genuinely curious about the woman who had just redefined his understanding of marksmanship capability. "Ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but that tattoo, is it unit-related? In special operations, ink often tells stories." "It's personal," Meadow said firmly, but her hand instinctively moved to cover the area where the black lines had been visible. The life insurance documentation spread across the command desk told a story of careful financial planning for high-risk military operations. Specialized policies designed for special operations personnel, with coverage calculations that factored in deployment cycles and combat exposure. investment strategies tailored for irregular military income, accounting for the unique challenges of transitioning from active duty to civilian careers. These weren't standard financial products. They were security guarantees that allowed operators to focus on missions without worrying about family protection. Proper military financial planning reduced stress-related performance issues by 40%. Master Chief Rivera returned from the communications center with a troubled expression. He gestured for Commander Vale to join him away from the group, and their whispered conversation grew increasingly intense. After several minutes, Vale's face had gone completely pale. "Miss Sterling," Vale called out, his voice carrying new authority. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" As they walked away from the gathered SEALs, Vale's mind was racing. Rivera's background check had turned up disturbing inconsistencies. Meadow Sterling existed as a person, social security number, civilian contractor credentials, even a clean driving record. But there were gaps in her history, periods where she seemed to disappear from any official records. "Miss Sterling," Vale began carefully. "Chief Rivera ran a routine background verification, and we're finding some anomalies. Could you clarify your military service record?" Meadow stopped walking and turned to face him directly. For a moment, her carefully maintained civilian demeanor slipped, and Vale caught a glimpse of something much harder underneath. "Commander, my contractor credentials are legitimate. I'm qualified to provide the training specified in my Pentagon authorization. Is there a specific problem with my performance today?" "No," Vale admitted. "Your performance has been extraordinary. That's actually what's concerning me. The level of skill you've demonstrated suggests training that goes far beyond standard military instruction. People can exceed expectations, sir." "Not like this," Vale said firmly. "What you did today, 5 shots through the same hole at 500 yards, then perfect performance under full combat simulation. That's not exceptional military training. That's elite special operations level skill." Meadow said nothing, but something in her posture shifted. The casual contractor facade was melting away, replaced by the bearing of someone accustomed to handling classified information under pressure. "Miss Sterling, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Have you ever been assigned to any special operations unit, particularly one involved in classified activities?" The silence stretched between them for long seconds. In the distance, the SEALs were engaged in animated discussion about the shooting demonstration they'd witnessed. But here, in this bubble of growing tension, 2 people were circling around truths that could reshape everything. "Commander," Meadow said finally, "there are some questions that I'm not authorized to answer. My current assignment is to provide marksmanship instruction to your personnel. I believe I've demonstrated my qualifications for that role." It was confirmation without admission, the kind of careful response that intelligence professionals used when discussing matters that officially didn't exist. Vale felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place, but the picture they formed was deeply troubling. Back on the range, the SEALs were becoming increasingly restless. The extraordinary shooting demonstration had shattered their preconceptions, but the growing secrecy around Meadow's background was raising new concerns. These were men accustomed to knowing exactly who they were working with, and the mystery surrounding their supposed instructor was triggering professional paranoia. Lieutenant Pierce had been studying Meadow from a distance, trying to reconcile her appearance with her demonstrated capabilities. "Something about this whole situation is wrong," he muttered to Petty Officer Santos. "Civilian contractors don't shoot like that. Holy cow, most of our own snipers don't shoot like that." "Maybe she's former military," Santos suggested. "Plenty of special operations personnel transition to civilian work. Then why the secrecy? Why not just say she's former Special Forces or Rangers? People are proud of that service." Casey Walsh overheard the conversation and found herself drawn into the speculation. What if she's not supposed to be here? What if this whole civilian contractor thing is a cover for something else? The questions were multiplying faster than answers, and the atmosphere on the range was becoming increasingly tense. When Commander Vale and Meadow returned from their private conversation, both looked like they were carrying the weight of significant secrets. "Attention!" Vale called out, bringing the assembled SEALs to formation. I want everyone to understand that today's training exercise involved demonstration of advanced marksmanship techniques. Ms. Sterling's background and qualifications are verified through appropriate channels. Any questions about classified matters should be directed through proper command structure. It was military speak for "stop asking questions," but it only increased the speculation. When officers started talking about classified matters and proper channels, it usually meant that significant secrets were involved. Meadow stepped forward to address the group directly. "Gentleman and lady," she nodded toward Casey. "Today's demonstration was intended to show you possibilities beyond your current training. The techniques I've shown can be learned, but they require dedication and practice that goes beyond normal military instruction." "Ma'am," Master Chief Rivera said carefully, "speaking hypothetically, what kind of operational experience would be necessary to develop those skills?" Meadow met his gaze directly. "Hypothetically, Chief, the kind of experience that people don't talk about in polite company. The kind that happens in places that don't appear on maps, against enemies who don't wear uniforms." The answer hung in the air like a confession. Everyone present understood the euphemisms. She was talking about classified special operations, the kind of missions that officially never happened. "And hypothetically," Rivera continued, "what would motivate someone with that level of experience to work as a civilian contractor, teaching basic marksmanship to people who already have extensive training?" For the first time since arriving at the range, Meadow's composure cracked slightly. Her fingers moved unconsciously to her collar, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained facade slipped. "Sometimes, Chief, people need to find new ways to serve. Sometimes the old ways become unavailable." It was then that Master Chief Rivera decided to take a calculated risk. He'd been in special operations long enough to recognize the signs of someone carrying significant psychological weight. Meadow's demeanor, her evasive answers, her extraordinary skills, everything pointed to someone with a classified past that had ended badly. Rivera pulled out his phone and accessed a secure database that most people didn't know existed. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, entering search parameters that would trigger alerts if the wrong people were watching. But he had clearance levels that allowed certain inquiries, especially when they involved potential security threats on his base. What he found made his blood run cold. The search results showed multiple classified files, each one more disturbing than the last. Operational records that painted a picture of someone who shouldn't exist, someone whose very presence raised questions about missions that had never been officially acknowledged. That dragon tattoo is about to change everything. Like this video right now if you're as shocked as these SEALs. Subscribe because the truth about those 500 kills is more incredible than you can imagine. The classified legal documents required for special operations clearances represented years of specialized education and certification, advanced tactical training programs designed by military professionals who understood that civilian shooting sports bore no resemblance to combat accuracy requirements. These courses covered ballistics, environmental factors, stress shooting, and psychological conditioning under extreme pressure. Veterans transitioning to civilian careers found that such certifications opened doors in law enforcement, private security, and specialized contracting roles. Investment in elite-level tactical education wasn't just career advancement. It was the difference between being qualified and being irreplaceable. "Miss Sterling," Rivera said, his voice carrying new weight. Or should I say, Miss Kane. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Meadow went completely still, her body language shifting from cautious civilian to full combat readiness in the space of a heartbeat. Her hand moved instinctively toward where a sidearm would normally be holstered, and her eyes scanned the assembled group with the calculating gaze of someone assessing threats. "I think you have me confused with someone else, Chief," she said, but her voice had changed completely. Gone was the careful civilian tone, replaced by the clipped precision of someone accustomed to operating under extreme pressure. Rivera held up his phone, the screen displaying classified information that made several SEALs step back in recognition. Lieutenant Colonel Harper Kane, call sign Shadowfang. 500 confirmed eliminations across 7 theaters. Presumed killed in action during Operation Ghost Valley, 3 years ago. The words hit the assembled group like a physical blow. Even in the highly classified world of special operations, certain names became legend. Shadowfang was one of them, a mythical figure who had supposedly operated in the deepest black operations, achieving elimination counts that bordered on the supernatural. But Shadowfang was supposed to be dead. "Holy cow," Lieutenant Pierce whispered. "Shadowfang's real?" The silence that followed was pregnant with implications that none of them fully understood. They were standing in the presence of someone who had become legend within their community, someone whose very existence raised questions about operations that officially never happened. Knox Blackwood, who had spent the morning mocking and belittling the small blonde woman, found himself backing away involuntarily. The casual cruelty that had seemed so entertaining hours earlier now felt like cosmic stupidity. He'd been taunting one of the most dangerous human beings ever to draw breath. Colonel Wade Thornfield chose that moment to make his entrance, his polished boots clicking against the concrete as he approached the group. Thornfield was Intelligence Division, a man whose job involved knowing things that other people weren't supposed to know. When he saw the gathered crowd and heard the name that was being whispered among them, his face went through a series of expressions that ranged from confusion to recognition to something approaching terror. "Clear this area immediately," Thornfield commanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made immediate obedience automatic. This is now a classified situation, but it was too late for containment. The secret was out, spreading through the group like wildfire. The civilian contractor they'd been mocking all morning was actually one of the most decorated and dangerous special operations personnel in military history. Someone who had been officially dead for 3 years, but was somehow standing in front of them, very much alive. As the range was secured and the situation contained, Meadow stood in the harsh California sunlight with her secret finally exposed. The carefully constructed identity that had protected her for 3 years was crumbling in real time, replaced by questions that threatened to expose not just her true purpose, but the entire operation that had brought her to Coronado. The dragon tattoo on her right arm seemed to pulse beneath the gray fabric of her shirt, its intricate design holding secrets that could reshape their understanding of warfare itself. In exactly 18 minutes, when that innocent-looking design was finally revealed in its full complexity, the most dangerous man in the facility would freeze mid-sentence and ask a question that would change everything. Who authorized that insignia? Part 2. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Coronado Range as Colonel Thornfield established a secure perimeter around the training area. His Intelligence Division personnel moved with practiced efficiency, creating a bubble of classification that would contain whatever was about to unfold. But containment was a luxury that had already been lost. The name Shadowfang was spreading through the SEAL community like wildfire, carried by encrypted messages and hushed conversations that reached far beyond the base. Meadow Sterling, or rather Lieutenant Colonel Harper Kane, stood in the center of it all, with the kind of stillness that predators possess just before they strike. Her blue eyes tracked every movement, cataloged every face, assessed every potential threat with the calculating precision of someone who had survived situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Knox Blackwood found himself unable to look away from the woman he'd spent the morning tormenting. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, his brain struggling to reconcile the small blonde figure with the legendary operator whose exploits had become whispered mythology in special operations circles. Shadowfang wasn't supposed to be real. She certainly wasn't supposed to be standing 3 feet away from him, very much alive and very much aware that he'd been treating her like a disposable target for public humiliation. "Ma'am," Knox said, his voice barely above a whisper. I called you a daycare worker. I said you were dead weight." Harper's expression softened slightly, the first genuine emotion she'd shown since her identity was exposed. "Sergeant, you reacted to what you saw. In your position, with the information you had, your response was reasonable. One of the things you learn in deep operations is that assumptions based on appearance can be tactically useful." But her words did nothing to ease the growing horror in Knox's mind. He'd mocked someone with 500 confirmed kills. He'd publicly humiliated a woman who had survived operations that had killed entire units. The realization was like staring into an abyss and discovering that the abyss had been watching him all along. Master Chief Rivera stepped forward, his weathered face showing the kind of respect reserved for fellow warriors who had earned their place through blood and sacrifice. "Colonel Kane, I need to understand what we're dealing with here. If you're supposed to be dead, if Ghost Valley was classified at levels I'm not cleared for, then your presence here raises questions I'm not equipped to handle." Harper nodded slowly, recognizing the position Rivera was in. "Chief, I understand your concern, but I want you to know that my current assignment is legitimate. I'm not here under false pretenses or for any purpose that threatens operational security." "Then why the cover identity?" Lieutenant Pierce asked, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity mixed with a healthy dose of fear. "Why not just say your former special operations?" For the first time since her identity had been revealed, Harper's composure showed real cracks. Her hand moved unconsciously to her right arm, fingers tracing the outline of something hidden beneath the gray fabric of her shirt. "Because Shadow Fang died at Ghost Valley," she said quietly. "What happened there? It wasn't something that anyone was supposed to survive. When I made it out, certain people decided that it would be easier if Harper Kane remained officially dead." The implications of that statement hit the assembled group like a physical blow. They were talking about a cover-up at the highest levels, decisions made by people with the authority to erase someone from existence. "Who made that decision?" Colonel Thornfield asked, his intelligence training making him focus on the operational aspects rather than the emotional weight. "People whose names you wouldn't recognize," Harper replied. "People who make the kind of decisions that keep operations like Ghost Valley from appearing in congressional hearings." Casey Walsh found her voice, asking the question that everyone was thinking. What happened at Ghost Valley? Why did an entire unit go in and nobody come out? Harper was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant with memories that were clearly painful. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of survivor's guilt and classified secrets that had shaped the last 3 years of her life. Ghost Valley was supposed to be a surgical strike against a high-value target in a region that doesn't officially exist. Intelligence indicated a single compound with minimal security. Quick in, quick out. Minimal collateral damage. She paused, her breathing becoming more controlled, more deliberate. Intelligence was wrong. What we found was a trap. Someone had leaked our mission parameters, our insertion route, our extraction timeline. When we arrived, instead of a lightly defended compound, we found a prepared kill zone with enemy forces that had been waiting for days. The silence stretched as the SEALs absorbed the implications. Leaked mission parameters meant someone with access to the highest levels of classified information had betrayed the operation. 12 operators went in, Harper continued. 11 died in the first hour. I spent 4 days in that hellscape, moving from position to position, picking off enemy forces while calling for extraction that never came. 4 days, Knox whispered, his voice filled with something approaching reverence. Alone, surrounded by hostiles. I had my rifle, limited ammunition, and no communications with command. The enemy knew someone was still alive. They could see the effects of my shooting, but they couldn't locate me. So they waited. Lieutenant Pierce asked the obvious question. How did you get out? Harper's smile was cold and without humor. I didn't get out, Lieutenant. I went through. When extraction finally arrived, they found a compound filled with enemy dead and one very tired sniper who had run out of ammunition. The assembled SEALs stared at her with expressions of awe and horror. The kind of sustained combat she was describing went beyond heroic into the realm of the superhuman. How many? Master Chief Rivera asked quietly. Enemy casualties from Ghost Valley. 87 confirmed eliminations over 4 days. It brought my total to 500. She touched her right arm again, indicating something beneath the fabric. This marks the 87 from Ghost Valley. I had it modified after I got back to acknowledge the cost of that operation. Commander Vale had been listening to the exchange with growing alarm. A 12-person special operations team wiped out in a leaked mission. A survivor presumed dead, but actually alive, operating under false identity. The operational security implications were staggering. Harper, he said, using her real name for the first time. I have to ask. Who authorized your new identity? Who's running your current assignment? That's above your clearance level, Commander. What I can tell you is that my presence here is authorized by people who have the authority to make such decisions. It was a non-answer that confirmed Vale's worst fears. They were dealing with classification levels that reached into the black budget realm, operations that didn't appear on any official organization chart. But before Vale could press further, the sound of approaching vehicles drew everyone's attention. 3 black SUVs with government plates were pulling up to the range, their arrival coordinated with military precision. "Expecting visitors, Commander?" Harper asked quietly, but her voice carried new tension. "No," Vale replied grimly. "I wasn't." The SUVs disgorged a dozen people in dark suits, their bearing and coordination marking them as federal agents rather than military personnel. At their head was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. "Commander Vale," the woman called out as she approached. "I'm Agent Sarah Cross, Defense Intelligence Agency. I believe you have someone here who belongs to us." Agent Cross's gaze found Harper immediately, and the recognition between them was instant and charged with tension. "Shadow Fang," Cross said simply. "You've been busy." "Agent Cross," Harper replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't expecting a visit." "No, I imagine you weren't." When Harper Kane's name started appearing in military database queries, it triggered some very high-level alerts. People who thought they'd never hear that name again suddenly found themselves answering uncomfortable questions. Cross gestured toward the SUVs where additional agents were setting up what looked like a mobile command center. "We need to talk, Shadow Fang, about Ghost Valley, about your current assignment, and about some recent developments that require your immediate attention." The assembled SEALs found themselves caught in the middle of what was clearly a much larger situation than any of them had anticipated. Their civilian contractor was not only a legendary special operations veteran, but apparently still involved in activities that attracted the attention of federal intelligence agencies. "Agent Cross," Commander Vale interjected, "I need to understand what's happening here. If Colonel Kane is involved in ongoing operations, I need to know how that affects my personnel and my base." Cross studied Vale with calculating eyes. "Commander, you and your people have stumbled into a situation that involves national security at the highest levels. What I can tell you is that Shadow Fang's presence here today was not coincidental." She turned to address the assembled SEALs directly. "Gentlemen and lady, you've just witnessed a demonstration of capabilities that represent decades of specialized training and operational experience. Colonel Kane is one of fewer than a dozen people in the world who possess her particular skill set." Cross paused, letting that sink in. "She's also needed for an operation that could not be discussed until her identity was confirmed and her capabilities verified by independent witnesses." "What kind of operation?" Master Chief Rivera asked. "The kind that requires someone who can put 5 rounds through the same hole at 500 yards while under combat stress. The kind that needs an operator who can survive alone in hostile territory for extended periods. The kind that demands someone with 500 confirmed eliminations and the psychological strength to carry that burden." Cross gestured toward a tablet that one of her agents had brought over. The screen showed satellite imagery of what looked like a compound in a desert environment, surrounded by hostile terrain and marked with tactical overlays. 18 hours ago, a facility holding 16 American hostages was located in a region where conventional military intervention would trigger international incidents. The hostages include 2 senators, 4 defense contractors, and 10 aid workers. Intelligence indicates they will be executed in 36 hours unless ransom demands are met. The tactical situation was clear to everyone present. A hostage rescue in hostile territory with political constraints that prevented conventional military response, requiring the kind of precision shooting that could eliminate threats without endangering civilians. "You need a sniper," Lieutenant Pierce said. "We need the sniper," Cross corrected. "We need someone who can make impossible shots under impossible conditions. We need Shadow Fang." Harper had been listening to the exchange with growing understanding. The marksmanship demonstration, the identity verification, The presence of federal agents. It had all been carefully orchestrated to reach this moment. "Agent Cross," she said quietly, "when you say I'm needed, are you asking or telling?" Cross met her gaze directly. "I'm asking, Shadowfang. Despite what happened at Ghost Valley, despite the way certain people handled your survival, you still have choices. But I want you to understand what's at stake." She gestured toward the satellite imagery again. 16 Americans are going to die in 36 hours unless someone can reach them. Conventional assault would result in their execution before our people could breach the compound. Air support would level the facility with the hostages inside. The only viable option is a precision strike that eliminates the guards while leaving the hostages unharmed. "How many hostiles?" Harper asked, her voice taking on the clinical tone of someone analyzing a tactical problem. "Satellite count shows 23 guards positioned at multiple levels throughout the compound. Maximum engagement range would be 800 to 1,000 yards depending on position selection. Environmental factors include desert heat, unpredictable wind patterns, and limited ammunition resupply." Cross paused, meeting Harper's eyes directly. In other words, exactly the kind of mission that Shadowfang was designed for. The assembled SEALs watched this exchange with fascination and growing respect. They were witnessing the recruitment of a legendary operator for a mission that would test the absolute limits of human capability. "Timeline?" Harper asked. "Insertion in 24 hours. Mission execution in 36 hours. Extraction contingent on mission success. Support limited. You'd be working with a 4-person team: spotter, communications, medical, and extraction coordinator. All volunteers from units you've worked with before." Harper was quiet for a long moment, her fingers unconsciously tracing the hidden tattoo as she calculated odds, assessed risks, and weighed the cost of returning to a world she'd thought she'd left behind. "Agent Cross," she said finally, "if I do this, if I go back to being Shadowfang one more time, I want something in return. Name it. Full disclosure about Ghost Valley. Who leaked our mission parameters, who made the decision to declare me dead, and why the people responsible are still in positions where they can make those kinds of decisions." Cross nodded slowly. "Agreed. Complete the mission and you'll have access to files that will answer all of those questions. And the people responsible will face appropriate consequences." It was a promise of justice that had been 3 years in the making. Harper looked around at the assembled SEALs, these elite warriors who had witnessed her revelation and accepted the truth of who she really was. "Sergeant Knox," she said, addressing the man who had called her a daycare worker just hours earlier. "You asked what I could teach you that you didn't already know." "Yes, ma'am. I can teach you that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody expects. I can teach you that judgment based on appearance can be tactically fatal. And I can teach you that when everything goes wrong, when your team is gone and your ammunition is limited and your extraction is compromised, sometimes the only choice is to go through instead of going around." She turned to address the group as a whole. "Today you learned that I'm someone you thought was dead. Tomorrow, 16 Americans will learn whether I'm still someone who can keep people alive." But before the conversation could continue further, Knox stepped forward with obvious distress. The weight of his earlier behavior was crushing him, and he needed to make amends before Harper disappeared back into whatever shadows had hidden her for 3 years. "Colonel Kane," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to know how sorry I am. The things I said, the way I treated you, there's no excuse for that kind of behavior." Harper studied his face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with the kind of self-recrimination that could destroy a person if left unchecked. "Sergeant, what happened here today wasn't about you recognizing who I was. It was about how you treat people when you think they can't fight back." The words hit Knox like a physical blow, but Harper wasn't finished. "The question isn't whether you're sorry for mocking Shadowfang. The question is whether you'll change how you treat the next person who seems weak or different or out of place." Knox nodded wordlessly, understanding that he'd been given a lesson more valuable than any tactical training. As Agent Cross began coordinating the logistics for Harper's extraction and mission preparation, the SEAL community was already processing the implications of what they'd witnessed. Word was spreading through encrypted channels and secure communications. carrying the story of a legendary operator who had returned from the dead. But the story was far from over. In the desert compound shown on Cross's satellite imagery, 16 Americans were counting down the hours until their scheduled execution, unaware that their salvation might come from someone whose very existence was officially denied. Harper reached into her equipment case and removed a small object, a coin-like medallion with the image of a dragon on one side and tally marks on the other. She handed it to Knox, who accepted it with trembling hands. "Something to remember today, Sergeant, and something to remember that the quiet ones are often the ones carrying the heaviest burdens." As Cross and her team began their preparations for departure, Harper took a moment to speak privately with Commander Vale. "Commander, I want you to know that everything that happened here today was genuine. The skills demonstration, the identity revelation, the mission briefing, all of it was real. Your people handled the situation with professionalism and integrity." "Shadowfang," Vale said, using her call sign with obvious respect, "I want you to know that what you did here today, showing these young operators that their assumptions could be wrong, that's valuable training that goes beyond marksmanship. They're good people, Commander. Take care of them. Bring those hostages home, Shadowfang. Show the world that legends are sometimes real." But as the black SUVs prepared to depart, Knox made a decision that would change the trajectory of everything that followed. His guilt and shame had been building throughout the day, and he needed to do something meaningful to atone for his behavior. "Colonel Kane," he called out, jogging after the convoy. "Ma'am, I want to volunteer for the support team." Harper stopped and turned to face him, surprise flickering across her features. "Sergeant, this isn't a training exercise. This is a real-world operation with a very high probability of casualties." "I understand that, ma'am. But I've spent the day learning that my judgments about people can be catastrophically wrong. Maybe it's time I learned to follow instead of lead." Cross studied Knox with professional interest. "Sergeant, what's your specialty?" "Communications and forward observation, ma'am. I've been..." Knox looked at Harper directly. "Ma'am, I know I have no right to ask this, but I need to make this right. I need to prove that I can be better than the man you met this morning." Harper considered his request for a long moment. The tactical part of her mind recognized that Knox's skills could be valuable, but the human part wondered if his motivations were sound. "Sergeant, this mission isn't about your redemption. 16 people are going to die if we fail, and I can't afford to have someone on my team whose primary motivation is personal guilt." "Yes, ma'am. But respectfully, maybe someone who's learned a hard lesson about assumptions might be exactly the kind of person you need watching your back." Agent Cross made the decision. "Sergeant Knox, report to the convoy in 60 seconds. We'll evaluate your qualifications during transport." As Knox gathered his gear with the efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire career, the other SEALs watched with a mixture of respect and envy. They were witnessing the birth of something that would become legend, the first mission of the reconstituted Shadowfang unit. Master Chief Rivera approached Harper one final time before her departure. "Colonel, I've got one more question. Hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to develop the kind of skills you've demonstrated today, where would they start?" Harper smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth she'd shown all day. "Hypothetically, Chief, start by treating every person you meet as if they might be carrying secrets you can't imagine. You never know when respect might save your life." Mind completely blown? Hit that like button and share this video, because everyone needs to see what happens when legends walk among us. Subscribe for more incredible military stories that will leave you speechless. The convoy rolled out of Coronado as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific horizon. Inside the lead SUV, Harper found herself sitting across from Knox, whose presence represented something more significant than just an additional team member. He was proof that people could change, that the lessons learned from today's events might ripple outward in ways that could reshape how warriors treated those they perceived as weak. But Harper's mind was already shifting to the mission ahead. 16 Americans in a desert compound, surrounded by hostiles who would kill them at the first sign of rescue attempt. The kind of tactical challenge that required not just exceptional shooting skills, but the psychological strength to make life-and-death decisions under impossible pressure. "Colonel Kane," Agent Cross said from the front seat, "I need to brief you on some additional intelligence that we couldn't discuss in front of the others." She handed Harper a classified tablet that showed enhanced satellite imagery of the target compound. "The hostiles aren't random terrorists. Our analysis suggests they're former military, possibly special operations personnel who've turned mercenary." "Leaked intelligence again?" Harper asked quietly. "We're investigating that possibility, but for now, assume that they know we're coming and plan accordingly." The implications sent a chill through the vehicle. If this was another Ghost Valley scenario, if someone with access to classified information was feeding intelligence to hostile forces, then Harper was walking into a trap designed specifically for her. Knox, monitoring communications from the rear seat, caught fragments of radio chatter that made his blood run cold. "Ma'am, I'm picking up encrypted traffic that suggests someone's been tracking our movements since we left Coronado." Cross activated a secure communication device that bypassed normal channels. "Control. This is Raven 6. Request immediate sweep for electronic surveillance and communication intercepts." The response came back within minutes, confirming Knox's suspicions. "Raven 6. Be advised that your convoy is being tracked by unknown parties using military-grade equipment. Recommend immediate route alteration and communication security protocols." Harper closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of betrayal settling over her like a suffocating blanket. Someone was always watching, always feeding information to people who wanted her dead. The pattern was becoming disturbingly familiar. "Agent Cross," she said quietly, "I need to know who else has access to mission parameters for this operation." Cross's expression darkened. "That's a very short list, Colonel, and everyone on it has been vetted at the highest levels. So were the people who leaked Ghost Valley." The convoy altered course, taking a circuitous route through Southern California that would make tracking more difficult. But Harper knew that sophisticated surveillance could follow them anywhere, especially if the Watchers had access to satellite imagery and real-time intelligence. As they approached a secure facility hidden in the desert hills east of San Diego, Knox made an observation that changed everyone's understanding of their situation. "Ma'am, I've been analyzing the communication intercepts we detected. The encryption signature matches protocols used by a very specific unit, one that was supposedly disbanded 3 years ago after Ghost Valley." Harper's blood ran cold. "Dragon Unit." "Yes, ma'am. The question is, how are Dragon Unit protocols being used by hostiles who supposedly have nothing to do with that operation?" Agent Cross activated additional security measures as they entered the facility. "Colonel Kane, we need to discuss the possibility that Ghost Valley wasn't the end of Dragon Unit, that maybe some members survived and have been operating independently." The secure facility was a marvel of hidden engineering, built into the mountainside with the kind of defensive capabilities that suggested preparation for scenarios involving hostile government action. Harper found herself in a briefing room that contained intelligence materials classified at levels she hadn't seen since her official death 3 years earlier. "Before we proceed with mission planning," Cross said, spreading documents across a conference table, "you need to understand what we've discovered about Ghost Valley and the people responsible for what happened to your unit." The first document was a classified after-action report that bore no resemblance to Harper's actual experience. According to the official version, Dragon Unit had successfully completed their mission, eliminated all hostile forces, and extracted without casualties. There was no mention of betrayed intelligence, no reference to a 4-day siege, no acknowledgement that 11 operators had died in a carefully prepared trap. "This is fiction," Harper said quietly. "None of this happened. Keep reading." The second document was even more disturbing. A classified memo authorizing the creation of false death certificates for all Dragon Unit personnel. The reasoning given was operational security and preservation of classified methods. In bureaucratic language, it meant that the truth about Ghost Valley was so damaging that it was easier to declare everyone dead than to investigate what had really happened. "Who signed this authorization?" Harper asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "General Morrison Hayes, Pentagon Special Operations Command, the same officer who's currently overseeing counterterrorism operations in 7 different theaters. The name hit Harper like a physical blow. Hayes had been her commanding officer during the early stages of her career, the man who had recommended her for special operations training, who had personally selected her for Dragon Unit. The idea that he had betrayed his own people was almost impossible to process. "Why?" she asked. "That's what we've been trying to figure out for 3 years. But tonight's mission may have given us the answer." Cross pulled up surveillance footage from multiple sources: satellite imagery, drone feeds, electronic intercepts. The hostage situation isn't random. The 16 Americans being held aren't just random targets. They're all people who have been investigating irregularities in special operations funding and personnel assignments. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Hayes hadn't been selling classified information to foreign governments. He'd been using classified operations to eliminate people who were getting too close to discovering his network of corruption and betrayal. "The hostages are investigators," Harper said, understanding flooding through her. "Congressional oversight personnel, defense auditors, and military investigators who've been tracking discrepancies in black budget operations. Someone wanted them eliminated, but needed it to look like a terrorist action rather than targeted assassination." Knox, monitoring communications from his position at the intelligence station, looked up with a grim expression. "Ma'am, I'm detecting new traffic related to our target location. The hostiles are receiving updated intelligence about our mission parameters." Cross cursed under her breath. "Someone's feeding them real-time information about our operation." "Just like Ghost Valley," Harper said quietly. "Someone with access to the highest levels is making sure the enemy knows exactly what we're planning." The betrayal was deeper and more systematic than she had imagined. This wasn't just about covering up a single operation gone wrong. It was about a network of corruption that reached to the highest levels of military command. "Agent Cross," Harper said, "I want to propose something that's going to sound insane." "I'm listening." "We don't abort the mission. We let them track us, let them think they know what we're planning. But instead of walking into their trap, we turn it around and use their intelligence against them." Cross studied Harper's face, recognizing the calculating expression of someone who had spent years operating in the deepest black operations. "You want to feed them false information. I want to do more than that. I want to identify everyone in Hayes' network, document their activities, and gather evidence that will stand up in court. Then I want to eliminate the threat they represent to American interests. That's incredibly dangerous. If they suspect you're working against them, then I'll be exactly where I've always been, alone, surrounded by hostiles, with limited ammunition and no support." Harper's smile was cold and predatory. "Except this time, I'll know who my real enemies are." The plan that emerged over the next several hours was complex, dangerous, and required precise timing that left no room for error. Harper would proceed with the hostage rescue mission, but she would be feeding false information back to Cross through encrypted channels that bypassed normal military communications. The key was making the mission appear to proceed according to Hayes' expectations, while actually serving a completely different purpose. Harper would rescue the hostages, but she would also gather intelligence that would expose the entire network of corruption and betrayal. Knox proved invaluable during the planning phase, his communications expertise allowing them to create encrypted channels that could operate independently of normal military networks. His motivation had evolved from personal guilt to genuine commitment to stopping the kind of corruption that had cost so many lives. As dawn approached and final preparations were completed, Harper found herself thinking about the Navy SEALs she'd left at Coronado, 40 elite operators who had witnessed her resurrection from official death, who had seen proof that legends could be real, and that quiet competence could triumph over loud arrogance. The helicopter insertion went perfectly, as these things rarely did. Harper and her support team were on the ground and moving toward their objective within minutes of touchdown. Knox proved his worth immediately, establishing communications that would allow real-time coordination while remaining invisible to enemy surveillance. The desert compound appeared exactly as described in the intelligence briefings. A fortress-like structure designed to withstand assault while providing overlapping fields of fire against any approaching force. But Harper had spent 3 years studying this kind of defensive positioning, and she knew that every fortress had weaknesses that could be exploited by someone with the right skills and patience. Harper settled into her hide position at exactly 0200 hours, her rifle trained on the compound through camouflage that would render her invisible to anyone more than 50 yards away. Through her scope, the facility appeared as a collection of heat signatures and moving shadows, guards patrolling in patterns that suggested professional training. Shadowfang, this is Overwatch. Knox's voice came through her earpiece, using proper tactical protocol despite their unconventional introduction. I count 23 hostiles, 16 civilians in the central structure. Guards are armed with assault rifles and positioned for overlapping coverage. Copy, Overwatch. Beginning target assessment. What Harper saw through her scope confirmed her worst fears. The guard positions weren't random. They were specifically designed to make a precision shooting approach nearly impossible. Whoever had planned this operation knew exactly how special operations rescue missions worked and had prepared accordingly. Overwatch, I'm seeing professional positioning and equipment. These aren't random terrorists. Confirmed, Shadowfang. Target discipline and movement patterns suggest military training. Harper spent the next hour studying the compound, identifying guard rotations, communication procedures, and potential vulnerabilities. What she found was deeply troubling. The entire setup appeared designed to lure a rescue attempt into a carefully prepared kill zone. At 0400 hours, 2 hours before the scheduled execution, Harper made her decision. Overwatch. Beginning engagement. Execute on my mark. Copy, Shadowfang. Standing by. The first shot broke the desert silence like a crack of thunder. One guard dropped instantly, eliminated with surgical precision before he could raise an alarm. Harper's rifle cycled smoothly, chambering the next round as she acquired her second target. Shot 2, 3, 4. Each one delivered with mechanical precision. Each guard eliminated before awareness could spread to the others. Harper moved through her target list with the methodical efficiency that had made her legendary. Her breathing controlled, her movements smooth as flowing water. By 0430, 12 guards had been eliminated without a single alarm being raised. The compound appeared peaceful, but Harper knew the remaining hostiles would be the most dangerous, the ones positioned to respond to exactly this kind of attack. Shadowfang, be advised. Movement in the central structure. Hostiles are moving toward the civilian holding area. The timeline had just accelerated. If the remaining guards reached the hostages, the mission would become a bloodbath that no amount of precision shooting could prevent. Harper shifted position, moving to a secondary hide that provided a different angle on the compound. Through her scope, she could see guards rushing toward the central building, assault rifles ready, their movements suggesting they were preparing to execute the hostages rather than allow rescue. Shot 13 came at a range of 1,400 yards, beyond the theoretical limits of her rifle system. The bullet took nearly 2 seconds to reach its target, requiring calculations that accounted for wind drift, bullet drop, and the movement of both shooter and target. The guard dropped just as he reached the entrance to the hostage building. 14, 15, 16. Harper was moving through the remaining targets with desperate speed, knowing that each second of delay increased the risk to the civilians. Her rifle had become an extension of her body, each shot delivered with the kind of precision that defied human capability. At 0445, with 7 guards remaining and dawn beginning to lighten the eastern horizon, Harper faced the impossible shot that would define the entire mission. The last guard cluster was positioned around the hostage building in a formation that made simultaneous elimination necessary. If any one of them had time to enter the structure, 16 Americans would die. Overwatch, I need target coordinates for simultaneous engagement. Shadowfang, that's 7 targets in overlapping positions. Maximum time window is 30 seconds before they breach the building. Copy. Execute in 3, 2, mark. What followed defied every principle of physics and human capability that military training manuals considered possible. 7 shots in 30 seconds, each one delivered at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, each one accounting for different environmental factors and target movements. 7 guards dropped in rapid succession, their elimination so precisely timed that the last one fell just as the first one's body hit the ground. The compound fell silent, its defensive perimeter completely neutralized by a single shooter, operating at ranges that most people would consider impossible. "Compound secure," Harper reported, her voice steady despite the superhuman feat she'd just accomplished. Moving to hostage extraction. The rescue itself was almost anticlimactic compared to the shooting exhibition that had preceded it. 16 Americans, congressional investigators, defense auditors, and military oversight personnel, emerged from their prison into a desert dawn that they'd never expected to see. But as the extraction helicopter approached and the rescued hostages were loaded aboard, Harper found herself thinking not about the mission's success, but about the implications of what she'd discovered. The compound's professional setup, the guards' military training, the tactical positioning that suggested inside knowledge of rescue procedures, all of it pointed to the same conclusion that had haunted her since Ghost Valley. Someone with access to the highest levels of classified information was feeding intelligence to hostile forces. Someone in a position of trust and authority was betraying American operations for reasons that Harper was finally beginning to understand. The helicopter ride back to the forward operating base gave Harper time to process the night's events. 23 confirmed eliminations, 16 civilians rescued, 0 friendly casualties. By any metric, the mission had been a complete success. But success felt hollow when it was built on a foundation of betrayal and cover-ups that reached to the highest levels of command. Agent Cross was waiting at the landing zone, her expression mixing relief with something that looked like apprehension. "Outstanding work, Shadowfang. Preliminary reports indicate all hostiles eliminated. All civilians recovered safely." "Agent Cross," Harper said as she disembarked, "we need to talk about Ghost Valley, about tonight's mission, and about whoever's been feeding intelligence to our enemies." Cross nodded grimly. "I was hoping you wouldn't notice the similarities." The compound setup was identical to Ghost Valley. Professional positioning, inside knowledge of our tactics, guards who knew exactly how to counter a precision shooting approach. Someone told them we were coming. That's what we're afraid of. Cross led Harper to a secure communications bunker, where classified materials were spread across multiple workstations. The setup looked like the kind of investigation that had been ongoing for months, possibly years. "Harper, what I'm about to show you is classified at levels that most government officials aren't cleared for. But you've earned the right to know the truth about what happened to your team and why you've been officially dead for 3 years." The documents Cross handed her painted a picture of corruption and betrayal that was more extensive than Harper had imagined. General Hayes hadn't been working alone. He was part of a network of senior officers who had been systematically eliminating people who posed threats to their operations. "Ghost Valley wasn't random," Cross explained. "Your unit was targeted because you were getting too close to discovering irregularities in special operations funding and personnel assignments." "We were investigators," Harper said, understanding flooding through her. "Dragon Unit was officially a precision strike team, but your real mission was counterintelligence. You were tracking the same kind of corruption that tonight's hostages were investigating." The revelation recontextualized everything Harper thought she knew about her career and the people she'd served with. Dragon Unit hadn't been eliminated to test her capabilities. They'd been murdered to prevent them from exposing a network of corruption that reached to the highest levels of command. "How deep does this go?" Harper asked. "Deep enough that we've been operating this investigation outside normal channels for 3 years. Deep enough that your official death was necessary to protect you while we gathered evidence." Cross activated a secure communication link that connected them to analysts at locations Harper couldn't identify. "We've been building a case against Hayes and his network, but we needed proof of their current activities. Tonight's operation provided that proof. The evidence was overwhelming. Communications intercepts, financial records, personnel files, everything needed to demonstrate that a group of senior military officers had been systematically betraying American interests for personal gain." "What happens now?" Harper asked. Now we finish what Dragon Unit started. We expose the entire network and ensure that the people responsible face justice for their crimes. But as Cross spoke, Knox's voice crackled through the communication system with urgent intensity. "Ma'am, we've got a problem. I'm detecting inbound aircraft, multiple contacts, military signature." Harper moved to the communications station, her tactical instincts taking over. Identification? Unknown, but they're using military transponder codes that shouldn't exist. ETA 15 minutes. Cross was already activating emergency protocols. "All personnel, prepare for immediate evacuation. This facility has been compromised." As alarms sounded and evacuation procedures began, Harper realized that the network of corruption was more extensive and more dangerous than anyone had suspected. The people responsible for Ghost Valley were still operating, still eliminating threats, still betraying American interests. But this time, Harper wasn't alone. She had allies, evidence, and most importantly, she had the truth about what had happened to her unit. The evacuation was completed just as the incoming aircraft became visible on the horizon. Harper found herself in the back of an armored vehicle racing across the desert, carrying evidence that could reshape the highest levels of American military command. "Agent Cross," she said as they distanced themselves from the compromised facility, "I want to finish this. I want to find every person responsible for Ghost Valley and make sure they face justice." "That's what we're hoping you'd say." "But Harper, the people we're dealing with have resources that extend far beyond what you faced tonight. They have access to classified information, military assets, and the authority to make people disappear. Then we'll have to be smarter than they are." Cross smiled for the first time since Harper had known her. "That's what we're counting on." As the convoy made its way through the pre-dawn darkness, Harper found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the Navy SEAL range at Coronado, where she'd revealed her true identity to a group of skeptical warriors, through the hostage rescue that had tested every skill she'd developed over years of impossible missions, to this final confrontation with the people who had betrayed everything she'd fought to protect. The dragon tattoo on her right arm seemed to pulse beneath the fabric of her shirt, its 500 hash marks representing not just lives taken, but justice served in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. But the final phase of her mission was just beginning. Somewhere in the corridors of power in Washington, General Hayes and his network of corrupt officers were planning their next move, unaware that Shadowfang had not only survived their attempts to eliminate her, but was now actively working to expose their crimes. The helicopter that had extracted Harper from the desert compound had also carried with it digital evidence that would reshape the American military's understanding of internal threats. Communications intercepts, financial records, and operational data that proved beyond doubt that senior officers had been systematically betraying American interests. 6 hours later, Harper found herself in a secure briefing room beneath the Pentagon, facing a panel of investigators whose clearance levels allowed them to handle the most sensitive national security matters. The evidence she had gathered was spread across multiple screens, each one showing another piece of the puzzle that revealed the scope of Hayes' network. "Colonel Kane," the lead investigator said, "the evidence you've provided is sufficient to initiate prosecutions at the highest levels, but we need your testimony to ensure that the people responsible are held accountable." Harper nodded, understanding that this was the moment she'd been working toward for 3 years. "I'm prepared to testify, but I want guarantees that the families of my unit members will be informed about what really happened at Ghost Valley." "Agreed. They deserve to know that their loved ones died as heroes, not as failed operators." The prosecutions that followed would reshape the American military's approach to internal security and accountability. General Hayes and 11 senior officers were arrested on charges ranging from espionage to murder, their network of corruption finally exposed and dismantled. But for Harper, the most important moment came when she was invited to speak at a memorial service for the 11 Dragon Unit operators who had died at Ghost Valley. Standing before their families and fellow warriors, she was finally able to tell the truth about their sacrifice and their dedication to protecting American interests. "They died because they were doing their jobs too well," Harper said, her voice carrying to every corner of Arlington National Cemetery. "They discovered threats to our nation's security, and they were eliminated by the very people they had sworn to protect us from. The service concluded with a 21-gun salute and the presentation of medals that had been classified for 3 years. Each family received recognition for their loved one's sacrifice, along with the knowledge that their deaths had not been in vain. As Harper walked away from the cemetery, she felt the weight of 3 years of secrecy and deception finally lifting from her shoulders. The dragon tattoo on her right arm no longer represented just the lives she had taken. It had become a symbol of justice preserved and truth revealed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Agent Cross. "New situation developing. Interested in consultation work?" Harper smiled, understanding that her work was far from finished. Somewhere in the world, there would always be people who needed protection from threats they couldn't see coming. People who deserved to have someone with 500 confirmed eliminations and the psychological strength to carry that burden standing between them and the darkness. She typed back, "Always ready to serve." 6 months later, at the Navy SEAL training facility in Coronado, a new instructor arrived for the advanced marksmanship program. She was tall, confident, and carried herself with the bearing of someone who had earned their place through exceptional service. Unlike her predecessor, this instructor made no effort to hide her identity or capabilities. The dragon tattoo on her right arm was clearly visible, its 500 hash marks serving as both credential and warning to anyone who thought they could judge a warrior's worth by their appearance. Knox Blackwood, now serving as the facility's senior training coordinator, welcomed her personally. "Ma'am, it's an honor to have you here. The troops are excited to learn from someone of your experience." Harper Kane, no longer hiding behind the identity of Meadow Sterling, surveyed the range where her journey had begun. "Sergeant Knox, I think we have a lot to teach them about the difference between appearance and capability." "Yes, ma'am. I've learned that lesson well." As the morning sun climbed over Coronado, Harper began setting up her equipment with the same methodical precision that had impressed the SEALs months earlier. But this time, there would be no mockery, no dismissal, no assumptions based on appearance. This time, the quiet ones would be respected from the beginning, because everyone had learned that true strength often comes disguised as vulnerability, and that sometimes the most dangerous warrior is the one who knows how to appear as prey until the moment of revelation. The dragon had risen from the shadows, and the world was a safer place because of it. The final entry in Harper's mission log read simply, "Shadowfang operational, ready for next assignment. The dragon sleeps, but never dies." And in secure facilities around the world, other quiet figures began their own journeys toward moments when they would reveal the strength that had been hidden beneath appearances of weakness. Because legends, once proven real, inspire others to discover the dragons within themselves. The story would continue, carried forward by those who understood that respect is earned, not through loud proclamations, but through quiet competence, not through arrogant display, but through precise action, not through the need to be seen, but through the willingness to remain invisible, until visibility serves a greater purpose. Harper Kane was home, and the world was waiting to discover what other legends walked among them, hiding in plain sight, ready to rise when justice demanded their revelation. 3 months into her new role as senior marksmanship instructor at Coronado, Harper Kane faced a challenge that would test everything she'd learned about leadership, trust, and the delicate balance between confidence and humility. The morning briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as 42 new SEAL candidates filed in for advanced weapons training. Unlike the seasoned operators who had witnessed Harper's revelation months earlier, these were fresh faces, young warriors who had heard whispers about the legendary Shadowfang, but had never seen her in action. Among them was Petty Officer 3rd Class Devin Ridge, a 22-year-old sniper from Montana, whose swagger preceded him like a storm front. Ridge had set new records at every training facility he'd attended, and his confidence bordered on arrogance in ways that reminded Harper uncomfortably of her own earlier encounters with dismissive attitudes. "Ma'am," Ridge announced loudly as Harper entered the briefing room, "I've been reviewing your curriculum, and I think there might be some areas where we could optimize the training methodology." The room fell silent. Even the newest candidates understood that you didn't critique a senior instructor's methods on your first day. especially not one whose dragon tattoo was clearly visible and whose reputation preceded her like rolling thunder. Harper studied Ridge with the same calculating gaze she'd once used to assess hostile positions. She recognized the type immediately: exceptional natural talent combined with youth and inexperience, creating a volatile mixture that could either forge an elite warrior or destroy someone who hadn't learned the limits of their own capabilities. "Petty Officer Ridge," she said calmly, "perhaps you'd like to demonstrate these optimization suggestions on the range?" "Yes, ma'am. I'd be honored to show what I've learned." Knox Blackwood, now serving as Harper's senior assistant instructor, caught her eye and shook his head slightly. He'd seen this dynamic before and knew how badly it could end for overconfident students who underestimated their instructors. The group moved to the precision range, where targets waited at distances from 300 to 1,500 yards. Harper had specifically requested the extended range capabilities, knowing that her students would need to be prepared for shots that pushed the absolute limits of human capability. "Standard qualification," Harper announced. 5 targets, 5 rounds, unknown distances between 800 and 1,200 yards. Targets will be visible for varying intervals between 10 and 20 seconds. Ridge stepped to the firing line with the confidence of someone who had never missed a shot that mattered. His rifle was a precision instrument, custom-modified and perfectly maintained. His positioning was textbook perfect, his breathing controlled, his trigger discipline flawless. The first target appeared at approximately 900 yards, visible for 15 seconds. Ridge's shot was perfect, dead center, exactly where it needed to be. The second target, at 1,100 yards, fell just as precisely. By the third target, murmurs of respect were rippling through the assembled candidates. But Harper was watching something that the others missed. Ridge's shots were technically perfect, but they lacked the kind of environmental awareness that separated elite snipers from merely excellent ones. He was shooting under ideal conditions, with unlimited preparation time, exactly the kind of scenario that rarely existed in real combat. The fourth and fifth targets fell to Ridge's rifle with mechanical precision. As he stood and cleared his weapon, the other candidates burst into spontaneous applause. Ridge had just demonstrated shooting that would qualify him for any elite unit in the world. "Excellent shooting, Petty Officer Ridge," Harper said genuinely. "Your technical skills are exceptional, and your precision is remarkable." Ridge smiled, thinking he'd proven his point about optimization suggestions. "However," Harper continued, "that was Phase 1 of the qualification. Phase 2 involves slightly different parameters." She gestured toward a section of the range that hadn't been used yet, an area where targets could be positioned at extreme ranges with environmental factors that would challenge even the most sophisticated equipment. 1,500 yards, crosswind conditions, moving targets, limited ammunition, and a time constraint that simulates real-world pressure. "Oh, and Ridge, this time, you'll be shooting while wearing full combat gear after completing a 2-mile run." The smile faded from Ridge's face as he realized that demonstration of technical skill under perfect conditions was only the beginning of what Harper considered adequate preparation. Knox stepped forward with the equipment pack that contained 40 pounds of combat gear. "Petty Officer Ridge, you've got 15 minutes to complete the run and return to the firing line. Your targets will begin appearing immediately upon your return, whether you're ready or not." As Ridge strapped on the heavy pack and began his run, Harper turned to address the remaining candidates. "What you just witnessed was excellent shooting under optimal conditions. What you're about to see is the difference between range qualification and combat effectiveness." The candidates watched Ridge disappear into the distance, his confident stride already showing signs of strain under the unexpected physical demands. Several of them were beginning to understand that their instructor's methods weren't arbitrary. They were designed to simulate the kind of conditions that elite operators faced in real-world situations. "Ma'am," asked Seaman Rodriguez, a quiet candidate from Texas, "how do we know when we're ready for the real thing?" Harper's expression grew serious. "Rodriguez, you're never ready for the real thing. You're just prepared to deal with being unprepared. Combat doesn't wait for perfect conditions or unlimited preparation time. It happens when you're tired, stressed, running low on ammunition, and operating with incomplete information. Knox monitored Ridge's progress through binoculars, calling out updates as the young sniper struggled to maintain his pace under the unexpected physical demands. "He's at the halfway point, ma'am. Pace is slowing significantly." "Good," Harper replied. "Let's see how his perfect technique holds up when his body is under stress." 15 minutes later, Ridge returned to the firing line, breathing heavily, his face flushed with exertion, and his hands trembling slightly from fatigue. The confident warrior who had left the range was replaced by someone who was beginning to understand the difference between training and reality. "Targets will begin appearing in 30 seconds, Harper announced. "Same parameters as before, 1,500 yards, 5 targets, 5 rounds. But now you're shooting with elevated heart rate, depleted energy reserves, and the knowledge that perfect conditions don't exist in the real world." The first target appeared exactly where Harper had promised, at the absolute limit of the range's capability, visible for only 12 seconds in crosswind conditions that would challenge any shooter. Ridge settled behind his rifle, trying to control his breathing and heart rate, while calculating wind drift and bullet drop under time pressure. His first shot missed completely. The second target appeared before Ridge could fully process what had gone wrong with his first attempt. Panic began to set in, as he realized that his technical perfection meant nothing when environmental factors and physical stress disrupted his carefully controlled shooting process. Shot 2 was closer, but still outside the scoring area. Ridge's confidence was crumbling in real time, as he discovered that excellence under perfect conditions didn't automatically translate to capability under stress. By the time the fifth target disappeared, Ridge had managed to hit only one of the 5 presentations, a failure rate that would have resulted in mission failure and potential casualties in real combat. He cleared his weapon and stepped back from the firing line, his face showing a mixture of embarrassment and dawning understanding. The lesson Harper had taught him wasn't about shooting technique. It was about the humility that comes from understanding the limits of your own capabilities. "Petty Officer Ridge," Harper said as she approached the firing line, "would you like to see how this exercise is supposed to be completed?" Without waiting for an answer, Harper strapped on the same 40-pound pack that Ridge had worn and began her own 2-mile run. But unlike Ridge's steady pace, Harper's movement was efficient and controlled, conserving energy while maintaining speed that suggested she could continue the pace indefinitely. Knox timed her return with a stopwatch. 14 minutes, 30 seconds, he announced, and her heart rate is barely elevated. Harper moved to the firing line with fluid grace, settling into position behind her rifle as if the physical exertion had been nothing more than a warm-up exercise. Her breathing was controlled, her movements precise, and her focus absolute. The targets appeared at the same impossible ranges, with the same time constraints, under the same environmental conditions that had defeated Ridge. But Harper's responses were different. Each shot delivered with mechanical precision despite the physical stress. Each target engaged with the kind of environmental awareness that comes from years of shooting under conditions where failure meant death. 5 targets, 5 shots, 5 hits. Perfect execution under circumstances that would challenge any shooter in the world. As Harper cleared her weapon and stepped back from the firing line, Ridge approached with obvious humility, replacing his earlier arrogance. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I apologize for questioning your methods. I thought I understood what elite shooting meant, but I was only seeing part of the picture." Harper's expression softened slightly. "Ridge, technical skill is important, but it's only the foundation. What separates elite operators from merely competent ones is the ability to maintain performance when everything goes wrong, when you're tired, scared, running low on resources, and operating with incomplete information." She gestured toward the targets that still bore the evidence of her perfect shooting. Anyone can hit targets under perfect conditions given enough time and preparation. But combat doesn't provide perfect conditions. It provides chaos, stress, and the constant pressure of knowing that other people's lives depend on your ability to perform when performance seems impossible. Ridge nodded, understanding flooding his features. "Ma'am, how do I develop that kind of capability?" "The same way everyone else does," Harper replied. Through training that pushes you beyond your comfort zone, through accepting that confidence without humility is dangerous, and through understanding that true excellence comes from preparing for the worst possible circumstances. As the group headed back to the briefing room, Knox fell into step beside Harper. Think he learned the lesson? Harper glanced back at Ridge, who was walking quietly among his fellow candidates, his earlier swagger replaced by thoughtful determination. I think he learned that there's always more to learn, and that's the most important lesson any of us can master. The dragon tattoo on her arm caught the afternoon sunlight, its 500 hash marks serving as a reminder that true strength often comes disguised as quiet competence, and that the most dangerous warriors are those who understand the difference between confidence and arrogance. In the distance, new challenges waited for the next generation of elite operators, and Harper Kane stood ready to ensure they were prepared for whatever darkness they might face.